Good morning, everyone. I am a volunteer from the IAH Colombian chapter, and I want to welcome you to our fourth cycle of groundwater talks. We really appreciate your support to our chapter and join us with our volunteers activities. I would like to share with you our talks schedule for this week. So today we will have Francesca Lotti, and I will introduce her later on. And remember that tomorrow, Thursday, we have the talk, the Mercants talk, and this talk will be using Zoom. So please remember to follow the link. I will share the link with you guys on the chat if you are interested in to join us tomorrow. And on Friday, we will have Marco Castañeda talk and will be through our YouTube channel. So can you, sorry, Francesca, can you please go past to the next? Thank you. So remember that today our talk will be 1 hour, 45 minutes for Francesca and 50 minutes for questions. So remember to leave your questions on our chat in YouTube, and at the end we will share with Francesca your questions. Also, please remember to help us fill in our Google Forms feedback in order to improve our talks. So now it's time to introduce Francesca. So Francesca Lotti is a consultant hydrogeologist and partner at Cataclysma. She has 20 years of experience in field investigations and numerical modeling of contaminated sites, mines, geothermal system, inverse modeling, especially with pests. She collaborates with research institutions and international companies. She also is an associate professor at the University of Camarino since 2008, supervisor of many students, PhD interns, and trainer at professional courses and lectures at second level masters. So Francesca, thank you so much for your time and welcome to our talks session.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you to you and the organizer for inviting me. I'm honored. This presentation is a little bit, I hope it will be interesting for the most of the participants. Of course, not everything I won't be able to explain everything in detail, but I will be available at a later time for giving more explanation. A love story. This is a love story. This is the description of a project that is pretty rare because there was full collaboration between us, the consultants, the client, and the authorities. So there was a very interactive and collaborative environment, which is not always so easy to achieve. Hold on just a second. Well, it seems that the presentation has disappeared. Hold on just a second. Let me see what happened.
I can see your screen and I can see your slide, but the big slide is just in blank. I mean, without anything. And the small one I can see in the small one image. Yes, maybe.
Let me close it and try again.
Yes.
Let me see it. Can you see now my presentation?
Yes, yes, now I can see. Yes, now it's perfect.
All right. All right, sorry about that. We were saying modeling is extremely widespread in the field of contaminated sites. It is used in many cases, and especially to design or evaluate pump and treat system design, or to compare the effectiveness of different remediation or containment techniques. Or also, we use modeling very often to define the potential contamination targets and see what happens at that point if the contamination arrives. Not so often modeling is used for risk assessment. It's not so common to use modeling. Most of the time, risk assessment stops at level 2 and not level 3. In the example that I'm going to talk about, the risk assessment was done with modeling, so it's a third level risk assessment. But in general, we use models when we want to obtain prediction about the future behavior of the system. Typically, if we have a source of contaminant and we can describe a certain extension of the plume at present day, we ask the model to tell us something about the future, about what is going to happen to the plume in the future, and especially if our contamination will reach or not, and at what concentration, and after how long, a certain target. That could be drinkable public drinkable well, or whatever other kind of target. So in a few words, we ask the model to give us predictions in order to take decisions. So we use modeling for the decision-making process in order to manage our system in the best way we can. Typically, we can simplify the steps in the approach of a contaminated site remediation project in 3 steps, very, very simplified. The first step is to define the aquifer geometry and the properties. After that, we define the geometry and the properties of the source of the contamination and the plume, how the plume is spread all around the source. Then we usually have to search for the best solution, to capture the plume or to remediate it or simply containing the plume and contamination in a way that it can't go around to make damages here and there. So basically, simplifying even in an extreme way, all our actions from characterization, containment, remediation, treatments, options, and so on, can be summarized in defining the flow field. And this is linked to the aquifer geometry and properties and the spatial extent of contamination. And this is linked to the point 2, defining the geometry and properties of the source and related plume. Then here it comes the modeling. Numerical models are used to support the decision making with predictions. And the predictions from the model are used to find the most effective solution to solve the problem. Now, this is the general workflow in the remediation project of a contaminated site. What sometimes is not kept in mind is that all numerical predictions are not correct, are essentially wrong. So in a certain way, it is essential, it is mandatory to do a couple of important things. The first one is to quantify the errors that we have at the beginning of the story. That means to quantify the errors that lies in the observation on the field, both in space and in time. The second step is to quantify the model prediction uncertainty. Every model has uncertainty associated, of course. No way to escape. So these two fundamental aspects, well, doesn't have to be approached at the end of the project of the remediation. They should start at the very beginning of the story. That's the why it must be a love story with all the preliminaries of a romance and not everything at the end, okay? So the model needs to know little by little the site from the very beginning, and a friendship. We need to start with a friendship that then can become something else. But basically, the important thing is to have the model since the beginning, because the model has the ability also to give indication about the monitoring and to detect errors in the conceptual model that is preliminary built and so on. So we call this the numerically enhanced conceptual modeling. It means we should start to mix the phases, especially for contaminated sites, without separating the definition of the conceptual model and making the project for the remediation and after doing the modeling at the very end. Things should walk together during the whole process, and the conceptual model itself should be built on the basis of preliminary modeling. So this could give benefits to the decision process and not reach the end and discover that everything was wrong since the beginning, as it sometimes happens. So the first point, what happens on the field? As I suppose that most of the participants that are listening now are hydrogeologists, and we are all aware of the fact that a lot of errors arise from field investigation, especially if we are modelers and we get the data not by ourselves, but we use the data that someone else provided to us, typically not a modeler. The first rule, according to me, this is my opinion, is that the modeler should go on the field and check every single point that was measured, every single data that will be then be included into the model. But that's my opinion. Anyway, the first source of error is in the observation. For instance, I guess that everybody has experienced the troubles that can arise from a wrong quantification of the borehole head elevation. That is wrong. If you have a wrong measurement of of the ground or of the borehole head, the hydraulic head would be wrong. And the hydraulic head is the observation that you are going to use to calibrate your model. And you calibrate your model, the parameters of your model, based on that wrong head. You obtain wrong parameters and you obtain wrong prediction based on the parameters that you estimate. I'm sure that this is a story that everybody knows about, according to the experience. Another point, we don't only have heads observation. Another big mystery is the aquifer bottom, and how we can, we can calibrate the parameters of a model. We can change the properties that we calibrate of the parameter, but usually we keep the bottom of the aquifer fixed. So we decide that at the very beginning of the modeling, and we keep that fixed. So we use the estimate of hydraulic conductivity as a surrogate for errors in the bottom. This is quite common. So this should come as a particular attention in the processing of the data. We should be able to process the data as much as we can in the best way, using all the available tools. And one big chapter here is the geostatistical approach. So we can have many points, and we can do the best estimate just starting from the processing, from the geostatistical processing of the data, to obtain the minimum error estimate of things that we are not going to calibrate afterwards in the model, of course. Then, talking about the geostatistical processing of the data, we said that one of the observations that we need to use to remediate a plume is the shape of the plume, is the geometry of the plume, the extension. And by definition, the plume is a non-stationary phenomenon, so theoretically could not be handled with the classical geostatistics because it has hot spot. And these hot spots are not outlier, are the source of contamination. So it is extremely important to process the concentration data in the best way we can. Not only in the best way we can, there is not one way to draw exactly what is the reality. So the only thing that we can do is to keep in mind different options to process the chemical data, to draw different shapes of the plume, and apply the Gaussian, of course, the Gaussian approach. This is just an example in which, if we get the concentration data and and perform a simple kriging with default settings, we obtain an interpolation like this. Then if we log transform the data, you know, the chemical, the contaminant usually is log distributed like this. So if we log transform before doing the kriging, we obtain something a little bit more similar to reality, that in our case is always unknown. Then we can go more sophisticated with ordinary kriging, with log transformation, and at the trend, because our hotspot here needs to be removed in order to obtain a more reliable interpolation. Again, if we join the information that we have about the flow direction, you know, the plume, let's say the main mechanism of transport of the plume is advection. So we can use the information that we have in the flow direction, that is in the heads measurement, in designing, defining the plume with a co-kriging. So if we use a co-kriging with a second order the trend, so we include information of the hydraulic heads and we log transform, there we can get closer and closer to reality, but we will never capture or be able to reproduce exactly what's really happens. So we have errors. We are surrounded by mistakes, by errors of interpretation in the data everywhere. And we can't avoid that. We just have to be aware of that and hopefully quantify that. So in this frame, it is a little bit funny to receive questions like this. So if today this is my contaminant source and this is my target, when the concentration will reach my point at a concentration, which will be the exact concentration and the exact time in which I will have the contaminant in the point, in the target. And sometimes there are some kind of models that can tell you that after 2 years, 1 month, 22 days, 5 hours and 35 seconds, you will have a concentration of your contaminant of 82 plus and minus, you know, very precise answer. Okay, it's nowadays it is obvious that we can't trust this kind of results. Numerical models cannot provide deterministic results, okay? We have measurement errors, as we said. We have the errors in the statistic analysis. We might forget some outliers. We have errors in the spatial distribution of our variables. We have errors in the conceptual model. It happens very often. We have defects in the numerical model building, and we have another family of errors that arise from considering the model output as unique, the only possible result. This is not true. So consider that there is hope. There is still hope. First of all, we calibrate the model, okay? So the first cure is to history matching. We have data on the site, and even if we have error in the data collected, which we can't avoid, we can build the model and test the model according to the observation, calibrating the parameters, typically hydraulic conductivity. And concerning this, there are two big approaches to model calibration. But in any case, the aim of calibration is to reduce the error between the model output and the observed data. And the function of errors that is usually used is the objective function, is a function of the error, where R is the residual. But now, every modeler knows that we can obtain a calibrated model using different settings of the model. So we can have a big number of equally calibrated models according to the parameters that we use or to the choices that we do. This is the problem of non-uniqueness of the solution. Just to make an example to those who are not very familiar with this concept. If we build a model and we have observation of head and we want to calibrate hydraulic conductivity and recharge, just two parameters, a very simple model in which we want to calibrate just two parameters, we can obtain the minimum of the objective function with an infinite number of combination between recharge and hydraulic conductivity. This example is from Hill and Tiedemann, and it is a very famous example in which we have in which it is explained how we cannot find a solution if we try to calibrate hydraulic conductivity and recharge based just on head's observation. We obtain the minimum of the objective function, so we calibrate the model. But the fact that recharge and hydraulic conductivity are two parameters which are perfectly correlated with each other, this means that we don't have a unique solution, but we have an infinite number of solutions that calibrate the model. So I can have this value of recharge, this value of recharge, this value of hydraulic conductivity, and I obtain the minimum of the objective function. Then I double both exactly, and I obtain again the same minimum value of residuals. So the model is well calibrated, but it's useless, completely useless. Now, if we, so this is just to say that calibrated doesn't mean a good model. It's not the only parameter to check. The scatter plot is not the only thing to look at to evaluate a model. But then, if I include in my data set not only the observations of head, but also the discharge of a river observation, the flow observation of the discharge of a river. So I have head observation and flow observation. You see that the solution is still not unique, but the numbers of solutions that I can obtain is no more infinite. This gray shadow here is the place where is the surface of the error. Imagine like a valley. In this case is like a valley. So this goes towards the minimum of the objective function, and it is like this. I don't know if you can see me, but it is a surface like this, a valley, but an infinite valley. Then, if we add information to the model, you see that we have a small bottom in this valley, which is deeper than the surrounding. So we start to find a minimum of the objective function, which is not infinite, but is a little bit more closed in this minimum contour that we have here. Then if we improve the quality of the data, you see that our surface of the solution can even get smaller, and we obtain a minimum with a bottom, let's say, and the number of solutions it's smaller. It will never be a point. We will never have a single solution. Never. We'll always have more than one solution. But one thing is an infinite number of solutions. Another thing is 100 possible solutions, for instance. Okay? So the point is that every model has a big number of equally calibrated results. To approach this kind of problem, one option is the principle of parsimony. We want to reach the minimum of the objective function. So we want to decrease, this is the objective function, and this is the number of parameters that I can vary to improve the calibration results. And as I increase the number of parameters, it is intuitive that I obtain better results. So typically I use zones of hydraulic conductivity. In the previous example, we just had one value of hydraulic conductivity, but I can use 2, 3, 4 values with different geometries of hydraulic conductivity that we call zones. And as I increase the number of zones of hydraulic conductivity, that is, as I increase the heterogeneity of my system, I can reach better result, lowering the objective function. And this is what happens if I start from 1 parameter to 10. You see that the observation objective function get lower and lower. The red line is the prediction error. So this is the error given, the blue line is the error given by the difference of the observed data with the simulated data. Then suppose that you can know reality in the future and compare the result, the prediction of your model, and compare it to what really happens. And you see, as the number of parameters increase, the error in prediction decreases as well. But at a certain point, the use of zone has a limit. It happens that as we increase and increase and increase the number of parameters, always having the same number of observation, we start to lose the capability of the parameter of being informed by the content of information of the observations. So what happens? The objective function drastically decreases. This means that we obtain a beautiful scatter plot, a beautiful fit a wonderfully calibrated model. But see what happens to the prediction. The error in prediction after a certain point start rising and reach a level which is exactly the same of the non-calibrated model. This is because we are destroying the capability of the model of being informed by the data, and we are overfitting the calibration. The typical example is that if we have a behavior of a system which goes like this, here we have a certain error, because the points are not perfectly on the line. We can reduce the error, but then if we can prediction of the system with this linear function, we are likely to be right, even if the error is higher than in this case. The error is 0, but then our system is unpredictable. So this doesn't work. This is overfitting. The same happens with the numerical modeling. Never trust a model which is calibrated too nicely, okay? So an example, all right, of a zone model, for instance, is this one. We have the zone of hydraulic conductivity characterized by a certain value, and you see, you can draw manually zones according to the geological setting, according to the experience, the knowledge of the site, and so on. But most of the time, reality cannot be constrained into zones. We usually deal with heterogeneity. We usually deal with a porous medium, when it is porous, that here has a value of parameters and 10 meters away as another value. So sometimes it is hard to restrain reality into piecewise homogeneous zones. And this is crucial when we are interested in contaminant transport. A contaminant follows the path along the medium which are drawn by heterogeneity. So a small length of sand could be the preferential pathway through which we have the travel of the contaminant. So it is extremely delicate, especially dealing with contaminant transport. There is a second family, another approach. There is another approach to solve this kind of problems, which gets the name of highly parametrized method. And instead of using zones like this with constant value, this approach make uses of pilot points. Pilot points are points in which we estimate the properties, for instance, hydraulic conductivity, and then create a spatial distribution based on just statistics. So the model, when we calibrate the model, we don't change the value of the parameter to a full zone with a constant value, but we adjust every single point to obtain a spatial distribution. Usually in model like that, we use hundreds of parameters. So how can be the principle of parsimony be respected? How can we control the overfitting? There is the mathematical regularization that constrain the possible outcome of the calibrated parameter field. So these points, each single point is not independent from all the other, but is linked to the other through the spatial correlation. So it's not like zones in which one zone is one parameter. In this case, we can have thousands of parameters, but kept the principle of parsimony is kept by the regularization, by the spatial correlation that exists among the points. So it's a mathematical solution that overcomes the problem of overfitting, of course. That's why we can use as many parameters as we want in this case. Now, let's say that calibration, all right, is important in a certain extent, but it's not the end of the model. We said that the end of the model usually is prediction, has a predictive purpose. The reason why we do a model is to predict something or to test something. So we use the calibrated model to obtain predictions. In highly parameterized methods, calibration is not the end of the model, it's an intermediate step. The natural consequence of using a big number of parameters is to go on in the process with uncertainty analysis. So once we calibrate a model and we obtain a parameter field that calibrate nicely our model, the job is not finished. We need to go on. We need to go on, and we need to see how many field distribution are able to calibrate the model the same way. In this way, we increase the complexity of our system, but we do not give deterministic answer. We give probability of results. We give just, we generate maybe 1,000, or how many you want, different realization which are equally calibrated, and we extract results from each one of those, and then see what is the probability distribution of the prediction. So if we want to know how long is the time of this particle to exit the system, realization 1, 2, 1,000, then we plot the frequency of the results, and we can say that this is the time with a certain confidence. Okay. Time is running fast. So here we are at the love story. So once upon a time, a contaminated site that met a model, and they walked together. So the site was contaminated by chloroform, benzene, and toluene, with a main target of contamination that was a river. And in 2005, pump and treat remediation started. So after 10 years, we were asked, after 10 years, why don't we stop the pump and treat? I mean, it's 10 years that the pump and treat is working, so maybe we don't need that anymore. So maybe the problem is solved. Could you, I was asked, could you please do a model to see what happens if we switch off the pump and treat, the hydraulic barrier? So I received a conceptual model, and according to the given conceptual model, built a numerical model with a steady state, a transient state calibration of a head, pumping test, river discharges, concentration, everything, but no way to calibrate the model. Using both observation and prior information. No way to match everything at the same time. So there was a complete review of the conceptual model. All the data were reanalyzed and additional data had to be collected, especially about the aquifer bottom geometry and the groundwater surface water interaction. So the site, I can't show everything, the site lies on a fluvial glacial lacustrine aquifer, so very, very heterogeneous and unconfined, but locally confined, leaky, so a very a complex setting, as it always is in this kind of environment. And the bottom was made of marley, clay, silty, calcareous formation that were supposed to be impermeable. So the first question was about, is the given aquifer bottom reliable? So the first review concerned the aquifer bottom. And the initial data set included only the borehole stratigraphic logs on the site. But then putting together not only the stratigraphic logs, but also all the data which was available, like resistivity survey and the stratigraphic log outside the site and the outcrop, which was all around the site, a new surface came out. And this new surface, these are the resistivity, which were not used before. These are the outcrops. So a new shape of a bottom came out from this review. And in this new setting, there was here a portion of the site with no data that, according to the just statistical reconstruction, had the deepest point of the site. But now I would ask a question if you could answer. We said that the contamination here was, one of the contaminant was chloroform. All right, chloroform. And the bottom here as like pool, forms like a pool here, okay, like shape like this. It is, I think that everybody can suspect something, that something is going on in that place of the site. But there are no monitoring piezometers, stratigraph, anything, because it is an operative site. So there are people working on that, there are buildings, and there was no chance to drill a borehole there, okay? First point, the bottom. Second point, the river. So the available measurement of the discharge highlights that it is a gaining stream. So it drains water from the aquifer. Okay, this is one aspect that should be checked, double checked with other information. For instance, okay, let's see the pumping test of wells nearby the river. Do they show that there is this connection between groundwater and surface water? Yes, because in this pumping test, we can observe that the cone of depression reaches a constant head. And here it is even more evident. All right, but actually, pumping test also showed that the cone depression generated by the pumping in some portion of the river crosses the river without any interference. So, yes, in some parts, the river is in connection with the aquifer, but in some other parts, you can pump one side of the river and observe the drawdown the other side. It means that in that portion, there is not interconnection. So that had to be reviewed as well. Now, another thing to be reviewed, source of contamination. Okay, it is in this source of the area, in this part of the site. But keeping in mind the fact that there is a deeper portion of the aquifer in a place in which we don't have monitoring. Are we sure about that? That the source is there? Also, getting the data, collecting the data at the very beginning and plotting the concentration with depth and increase could be observed even if the data were not that much. Well, 1 + 1 makes 2, and we suppose the existence of a diving plume of chloroform resting on the bottom of the aquifer in the deepest portion. So new piezometers were drilled, inclined, because they could not be drilled inside the building, so they were drilled from the outside. And there you go, there was the source of a contamination 1,000 times, with 1,000 concentration which were 1,000 times higher than the other source, which was not a source actually. And the nipple was found on the very bottom. So an infinite source of contamination. All right, so that there were all the updated needed to the conceptual model, and the flow model process started. And the long process of calibration started. So the calibration included all the possible information available. So the first phase was to calibrate the pre-barrier conditions. Beautifully calibrated, wonderful scatter plot. Don't trust that. Second calibration, put a series of stress periods, one after the other with different barrier configuration, hydraulic barrier configuration. And we start to see something that deviates. Then the transient calibration. The transient calibration, that supposed connection between river and aquifer, didn't give a good result. So that was changed, and the conductance of the river was included into the calibration process. And at the end, the data set was a new pumping test were performed, new data were collected, and new round of transient calibration was performed with much more transient observations. So results obtained through the pilot points that you can see as these red points gave this parameter distribution of hydraulic conductivity, then also conductance of the river was calibrated. But even if results were nice and calibration was very nice, and so the error was low, and all the data could somehow respect, the model could respect all the observed data. we applied the calibrated model, this first version of the model, because it was one version of the model, to the transport model. We used that to build the transport model and checked results. In this case, the transport was applied, and the aim was to see the concentration at the point of conformity around here of different contaminants. So that was done. And the risk analysis that was already done at level 2 was checked with the model doing a risk analysis tier 3. So the data were adjusted to be trying to test the result of the risk analysis second level through a model. So kind of validation through modeling of the risk analysis performed previously. So the concentration allowed inside the site were drawn in the model, and the transport model was run to see what was happening at the point of conformity. This is the point of conformity. This was done for different distributions of the contaminant. We said that was one version of the model. That was surely wrong. Results cannot be trustful. We applied different dispersivity to for each contaminant and obtained results which confirmed that the risk analysis tier 2 was that the concentration that was allowed inside the site were okay at the point of conformity. But, so according to the average results, all was fine with all contaminants, except a little bit of going over the threshold of vinyl chloride, but not in the average. So the job could have been finished here. We'd not finished here. We didn't trust the results, and we tested the result with null space Monte Carlo. So we performed uncertainty analysis, because these numbers are deterministic numbers that we can't trust, knowing all the sources of error or uncertainty of a model. So uncertainty analysis was performed over 200 equally calibrated versions of the model. So this is the objective function value of the original calibrated model, the red line. The bars here are the results of the 200 versions of the model. So all of them are around the same value, the same quality of the calibration. Some of them even better, calibrate even better to that. Okay, so we took this 200 realization, this 200 calibrated model, and checked what happened. First, we checked the probability distribution of the hydraulic conductivity calibrated. So we didn't have anymore one value of hydraulic conductivity for each point, but 200 values with a higher probability and a lower probability of value of hydraulic conductivity for each pilot point. This is, these graphs come from a couple of them. They were more than 300. So we had 300 graphs like that. Then also the longitudinal dispersivity was changed in a possible range of values, because we know nothing about the dispersivity. So we included variation of dispersivity to calibrate the data. And the results were not deterministic numbers, but a probability. So These are the results for different layers. These are the results for all layers of the model. And what was communicated to the authority was that the probability of not exceeding the threshold for that specific contaminant was between 58 and 72%. No certainties, but an indication on the basis of which taking decisions. But this is deeply honest. This is what a model can tell us. No realities, no precise solutions, probabilities, just probabilities. So do we trust those probabilities? Well, of course, the bigger is the number of realization that we do, the better it is. And in this way, highly parametrized inversion associated to Monte Carlo realization can support the conceptual model review and the decision-making process, providing a quantification of the uncertainty. And that is the quantification of the risk linked to taking or not taking an action, accepting or not accepting the risk of that threshold to be exceeded with a 40% of probability. So to conclude, the modelers are required to understand the system, characterize numerically what they know, and quantify what they don't know. And most importantly, explain to decision makers the risk associated with alternative actions, because we will never have a complete knowledge of the system. We will always have a margin of uncertainty to be quantified. So the model is not a crystal ball. This concept should be clear in model modeling. There is an uncertainty that cannot be reduced, but at the same time must be declared. At that point, the management needs to get responsibility, needs to accept or not accept the risk and become adaptive. So this is how modeling, in our opinion, can serve the decision-making process, not making promises of things that won't happen, but declaring what is probably will happen. The happy ending, this was the love story. The happy ending is that there is hope. So as far as we learn to declare the uncertainty associated to our models, we can really help the decision making. And there are important initiatives in this direction. For instance, the groundwater modeling decision support initiative, which is a big project which has just started, and that is focused on improving the role of groundwater modeling in supporting environmental management and decision making. It will be a place where find free open access software, training, tutorials, webinars. So the main focus of this project is education, and is teaching and spreading tools to help this approach of modeling to better serve decision process. Okay. Thank you.
Francesca, thank you so much for your presentation. Really interesting. I want to ask you something. Just in your last slide, where is the web site where we can find the material and everything that you was speaking?
So the site is still on construction. There is a temporary site which is hosted by the National Center for Groundwater. Let me send you, maybe I can send you the link that
Yes,
can share in the chart, okay?
Okay, yes.
Okay.
So now there are a couple questions from the people that is listening to us. So Oscar Fabian Sanchez, he is asking, what kind of uncertainty calibration do you use in the slide 15 and others? Monte Carlo, linear.
What kind of, sorry?
What kind of calibration do you use?
Which were the tools used to calibrate the model?
Yes, he's asking about Monte Carlo, linear.
Everything was done with PEST by John Doherty. The interface was groundwater vistas, but most of the, so to calibrate the model, that was enough. PEST is supported by vistas. But most of the uncertainty analysis was done with PEST, null space Monte Carlo, with PEST as a standalone software from the command line. So the tools that at present are included in graphical user interfaces are not complete to perform this kind of processing. And PEST, which is an open, which is a free code, can be used from outside the interface, and the utilities and potentialities and tools that are available are much more than what included in the whatever interface. So PEST was the code used for calibration with pilot point and Tikhonov regularization for the calibration process, and null space Monte Carlo for the uncertainty analysis. All is explained in the PEST manual, and soon there will be tutorials about that in this and this site and initiative that is starting right now.
Okay, the next question is, how do you take in account the geological geometry information on the pilot point method?
All right, you can, differently from calibrating observation, with the mathematical regularization, you can use the field data from pumping test, for instance, as observation, as prior information to be respected. So you add pilot points, all right? And you use that and you change the value of pilot points to calibrate the observation. But not only, you can associate a preferred value to be respected to the pilot point wherever you have a field information or even your expert knowledge about that kind of lithology. You can, of course, constrain. You have to actually, you have to constrain the possible value of your pilot points to the reliable values according to the geology that you have on your site. So you do this associating an initial value to your pilot point that becomes a prior information. So you are not just calibrating the hard knowledge, which are the measured data, but you are including into the calibration process the soft knowledge from also qualitative knowledge that you have from your experience. For instance, even if you don't have a specific hydraulic test, you might know that in this portion of the site, hydraulic conductivity is likely to be higher than hydraulic conductivity on this other side of my domain. It is very qualitative information. But if you know that, you need to inform the model about that. And you can do that with a prior information equation, simply saying that, please, along your calibration, keep those pilot points higher, with a higher value, with respect with this other group of pilot points. It's qualitative, but it's an information to be respected, okay? So you can inform your model, you have to inform your model about whatever you know, and even soft knowledge, qualitative knowledge, or intuition from the geologist or whatever needs to be included into the model. The model is basically a receptacle in which is a box in which you have to put inside all your knowledge, data, processing of the data, soft knowledge, experience, and everything can be included into the model to inform the calibration process, and now to obtain results at the end that, yes, fit the data, but go against the logic, you know, or what you know about reality, even if in a qualitative way. So everything can be needs to be included in the calibration process.
Okay, Jonathan is asking, the stakeholders in Italy like an answer in terms of probability?
I said that this love story had an happy ending. In this specific situation, we were extremely lucky. We dealt with enlightened authorities that even asked us to perform a course to explain the method. So they were amazed about the approach. They accepted the approach and asked for a course to better understand the approach. So that was a really happy ending. So in this case, yes, this kind of results was accepted, appreciated. But, you know, I must say that I had to fight with the client to convince the client that this kind of approach could be appreciated. They were sure that they used to say they will never accept that. We are wasting our times. We are spending a lot of, you know, time to do sophisticated things, and nobody will accept that. Not true. And the first rule is that if you don't try, you don't know. So it is worth trying. And the main point is that logic cannot be neglected. I mean, if you follow a logic process, nobody can say this is not acceptable, because nobody can say that I want an exact solution from the model. It is obvious that a model is not able to give that. The only thing that a model can give is probability, is a probability, something that might happen, but without certainty. So yes, the approach was appreciated. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, we have two more questions. So Oscar Sanchez, can you go a little deeper on how do you address the uncertainty in the contaminant source localization?
Actually, that was not performed through the modeling, because, you know, numerical modeling is not just the model. The most important part is processing of the data that you input into the model, of course. So the source, it was very simple to understand that the source could not be that. Something that nobody checked was the trend of contamination with depth. So this was the depth of boron, and this was the concentration of contaminant. And as the depth was higher, the concentration rised. And if you think about the chloroform has a higher density with respect to water. So it tends to move down, okay? And if you suspect, and this came out from the geostatistical analysis of the bottom, if you suspect that there is a deeper part, even if it is against the hydraulic gradient, the contamination is likely to move towards the deepest part. So in section, the site was like this, with a groundwater flow in this direction. So this is our potentiometric surface flow direction. So everybody was going and check here what was going on, without any piezometer in this part. But even if the flow direction is this one, and you have a dnepl coming even from here, it goes down and it follows the bottom because it's denser than water. So it doesn't care where the water flows. It follows the substratum, and there it came out the dnepl. So, well, that was obvious to me, but not after 10 years. Nobody thought about it. Sometimes you have to see things from a different perspective to find new aspects, and especially you have to join the information from different sources. This bottom, since there were no piezometers here, no borals, could have been non-detected if resistivity survey were not inspected. And when I asked if there were any resistivity investigation, they didn't remember to have it, and asked me, what do you have to do with that? So sometimes it's not easy to think how information can be crossed and can be improved, putting different sources together. That was it.
Okay, I think that this one is our last question, and it's from Oscar Villalba. He is asking, in order to know the perimeter protection wells, is necessary to make these exercises?
In order to know where to place, maybe the question is about where to place the point of conformity?
No, I think that is more related to the perimeter protection of wells. I assume, I don't know, because he's asking, in order to know the perimeter protection wells, is necessary to make these exercises. So I assume that is, I don't know, the area of the influence of the wells or something. I'm not sure.
Okay, if I have correctly understood, then yes, of course, this is my email, and I'm available to ask if I'm not right, if I misunderstood. Maybe the question is about when you have a drinkable well and you want to know the protection area of that well, if it is necessary to do that. That is drinkable water. Yes. Yes. There are two options. One option is that you keep extremely cautelative. You apply caution in an extreme way, and you go much farther than what is needed, and you protect a wider area. But in any case, you should know how much you can be wrong with your protection area of your well. Yes, well, actually, this is the only way I'm able to do modeling, associating an uncertainty to results in whatever kind of modeling. except preliminary modeling, or when you can be very qualitative. But when the risk is high, why not? There are the tools to do that. It's not difficult, and it's not expensive. You know, there is the chance, so why not? Yeah.
Okay, so Francesca, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us all your knowledge. So if you guys have more questions, feel free about to send an email to Francesca, and see you tomorrow in our tomorrow's talk. Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.